All right, I think everybody should be in. Hello and welcome. This beautiful sunny day in Seattle. Okay, so I would first like to thank the Southeast Asia Center, American Ethnic Studies, and the Simpson Center and the director, Kathy Woodward, for making this talk possible. I'm so excited to introduce to you Dr. Celine Chamisu. She's an award-winning filmmaker, scholar. She's professor and director of the School of Cinema at San Francisco State University. Her publications include The Hypersexuality of Race, the feminist porn book, Straight Jacket Sexualities, and she co-edited the special issue called The Unwatchability of Whiteness. Her most recent book is called The Proximity of Other Skins, and we will be hearing an excerpt from that book today. Her films include The Celine Archive, which just won the grand prize for Best Documentary Feature Film at the Culver City Film Festival, and the film will be distributed through Women Make Movies, as well as The Fact of Asian Women and many other films, and she's also the associate editor of GLQ. She is somebody that I admire, adore, aspire to be, and we're so lucky to be able to hear from her today. All right, as soon as you're ready.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's so special to be here. I'm wearing a lipstick that matches your professor, Lynn Wen's. And it just goes to show how we all look so different. And it's also really special to be in the same room with my former advisor, Connie So, the very first faculty member who invited me to her home to nurture us all in the field of Asian American studies. Do you remember that, Connie, next to Zachary's in Berkeley? So thank you so much.
Make you guys all walk.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to share this work. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully it will all work out. Here we go. Great, thank you. This talk today is about Asian American cinema, and it tackles immigration in the film Minari, history in my own film, The Celine Archive, and intimacy across inequality in two transnational films about Filipinx trans women. These films undo the social and psychic harm that we experience, that these subjects experience. And in these works, we come to recognize how film as a medium has this ability to generate not only new, but really needed narratives. And I really look forward to your questions. So on Korean American Day, which was January 13th, 2021, to, oh my gosh, I don't know why my slides are not working. Oh, here we go. No, I don't know how to go back. Oh, here we go. Thank you. So on Korean American Day, two prominent Hollywood production companies presented the 2020 Sundance Grand Jury Prize and Audience Award-winning film Minari, made in 2020 by Korean American filmmaker Lee Isaac Chung. The tickets for the Wednesday night online presentation of this independent film disappeared fast. You can actually now see this film, widely on streaming platforms. But at the time, we had been hearing about this film for over a year and not finding a way to see it. So this is one of the first times that it was shown, and it had this special event afterwards. So it was followed by a Q&A that was moderated by the award-winning film and television actor Sandra Oh, who cried as she spoke of how much she did not know she needed to see on screen, the particular gesture of putting Korean food in one's mouth while sitting in a specific way on the floor. She relished how the lead actress Han Ye-ri's face responds to seeing her trailer home in rural Arkansas for the first time, from the outside than the inside, as the frame reveals worsening conditions, including a tornado warning and losing electricity. Her face shifts from disappointment to courage as she confronts loss and sacrifice in this particular Korean American immigrant experience. A film that's been, nominated in the Oscars, and for the first time, an Asian American man is nominated for Best Actor, Stephen Yeun. So the conversation at this panel with Sandra Oh, the director, and the actors was punctuated by choked up silences as they struggled with words, which led them to different kinds of crying, that you could really feel in the Zoom gallery, and as well as see. The Minari director himself talked about how his own tears, fell during the year-long press junket. He spoke of writing the film based on remembering what it was like to be 6 years old, growing up in the rural South. When memory becomes film, however, it comes to life through collaboration, like what you see on the left side of the screen, where he's working with Stephen Yeun and incorporating his own life. So lead actor Stephen Yeun talked about his personal work, reconnecting to the trauma of moving to the US as a 4-year-old and of being severed, from homeland, culture, language, and family. In talking about this, he could barely speak, stopping to gather himself by closing his eyes, lowering his head, and stopping his lips from quivering by pursing them. Sandra Oh, would swoop in, to help him, and she was bawling herself until he could resume describing the powerful emotions that intimately informed his performance and his recollection of it. So I begin today with the most celebrated Asian American film today to dissect, what all this crying is about. Sandra Oh began by linking the power of the film's images to her need, her thirst, her hunger to experience on screen her particular culture manifested in the speaking of Korean words, hand gestures, bodily positions, and facial expressions. Her own face, aghast at the shock of her need, she identifies a hunger that finds expression in tears, intermittently streaming out of her eyes as she moderated. Stephen Yeun's crying was different, for it referred to and emerged from the trauma of loss. It took him aback, sharing that quality of surprise in Sandra Oh's experience. It's like they had been living with this and it was coming out. But unlike the slow spilling of her tears, his sounded like the outburst of pain, preventing him from speaking so that he had to turn away from our view. The cry discharged from him like a strong cough that literally disabled him from speaking and instead found him in a long silence and a bowed head, extended for long minutes. I welcome all of this crying. I recognize the feelings emanating from its sounds, both the slow cry of hunger from Sandra Oh and the outburst of pain from Stephen Yeun. As we are all immersed in the pandemic to cry together in the face of our loneliness, our losses, and our suffering from the deaths and deprivations we continue to endure, feels right in non-linguistic form. Yet the panel's crying on screen is about ongoing feelings that Asian Americans hold in relation to representation as a loss and sorrow both, and as a vehicle of collective trauma. The cultural theorist Stuart Hall identifies the work of representation or the depiction of people and events as providing cognitive maps of who we are in relation to others. So this crying is really mapping out this harm, that films do for Asian Americans, and how we perceive and behave in the world. For Asian Americans, moving images are fraught terrain, as invisibility, distortion, and simplification commingle in what feminist psychoanalytic film theorist Teresa de Lauretis calls the public and private fantasies of our popular culture. And, in the aftermath of the Atlanta shootings, I think we can see these images as a kind of powerful enforcement of a particular way of being in service of others. That's really apparent now, especially, in the past month. Today is the anniversary of the shootings. So the reactions that the Minari conversation revealed are not new. Asian American moviegoers and makers have expressed an unrelenting thirst for recognition on screen since the beginning, dating back to the birth of film itself, similar to when African Americans created content and engaged the technology of the new medium of cinema. Oh my goodness. Why is my thing not cooperating? Here we go. So Anna May Wong, an Asian American actor, deployed their emotions on screen, presenting them as cultural practices. Celluloid, they're not merely, to follow what Sarah Ahmed in The Cultural Politics of Emotion says as psychological states, but in how bodies are given value through emotion. So as you can see, in Anna May Wong's face, the wide range of emotions she's able to express as an actor. And this is, what I explore in my own experimental documentary, The Fact of Asian Women, which I completed in 2004. It dissected the structure and grammar of Asian American women's performances as commentary on the performances, even as they're doing them. And this is something that not only Anna May Wong does, but Nancy Kwan and Lucy Liu also perform. Anna May Wong really exploited popular fan culture to comment on her acting on screen as registering a kind of marginalization and saying that she engaged these images so she can create new terrains of meaning despite the impositions upon her through directing, through the screenwriting, that really limited her roles. So a long and deep archive of Asian American actors, have challenged since its beginnings the industry's commitment to racial stereotype or the repetitions of what Homi Bhabha defines as arrested representations. Lauded Japanese American immigrant actor Seshua Hayakawa, highly paid Hollywood villain from the 1910s to the 1960s, known for violent misogynistic acts such as branding a woman's back, began his own production company in Los Angeles. According to film scholar Daisuke Miyao, Hayakawa produced numerous films focused on Asian American and other racialized experiences. In his own films, Hayakawa's characters bypassed his Japanese American ethnicity to play more fully realized characters of Arab, Indian, Latinx, and Native American backgrounds. He rewrote his villainous violence against women too by giving up his own future for their safety, even if it meant his own death. So in his own films, we can see that he aimed to generate a new narrative, to distill trauma for characters that he was playing, but then also to counter narrativize the villains that he had to play. We need stories unique and specific to Asian Americans, like the ones Anna May Wong, Seshua Hayakawa, and Minari project, so that the medium of film can do its work more effectively. The work, I insist, is to make us feel. These feelings include grief, mourning, alienation, in ways both social and psychic, as identified in works on racial melancholia by Asian Americanist psychoanalytic literary scholars Anne Onling Chang and David Eng and Shin-Hee Han, and Asian American affect in popular culture by writers like Kathy Park Hong. So these are the books, that I'm reading right now that are really helping me think through the relationship between trauma, cinema, Asian American experience. I can't imagine, Hayakawa crying though about, the roles he had to take. What I sense from his own films is a rallying cry, one filled with anger that reveals a binding relationship to images that defined his legacy. In his lifetime, he wished to unshackle himself from his ill-fated roles, ill-famed, ill-fated roles, illustrating what documentary filmmakers Lonnie Ding and Renee Tajima Pena make with their self-defining images as a counter to what Asian Americanist media scholar Daryl Hamamoto calls controlling images. Because the Asian American story is so broad and wide-ranging, this collective call to be seen resonates with contemporary Asian American creators working in a productive and creative anger online today. They literally claim rage with self-naming like Phil Yu's Angry Asian Man and its companion podcast as branded as a service for media savvy, socially conscious, pop culture Asian Americans, and Layla Lee's Little Asian Girls, a comic and cartoon series focused on Kim, a grade school Korean American who unleashes her anger on injustices, replete with rude hand gestures and curses. And, there's the resonance of this rage, right? Like, I think it was yesterday that the New York Times journalist Charles Bro said that he has no other emotion left but rage, in light of the release of the video of Adam Toledo's murder a month ago. So my new in progress book, of which this work on Minari is part, focuses on Asian American childhoods and explores parental attachment as it relates to the children's sense of self in a world of their perpetual management. I actually begin my book with, the killing of a young Cambodian, 14-year-old boy in the hands of the serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer. He was almost saved, by the neighbors, but Jeffrey Dahmer, in, his blue eyes and blonde hair, kind of innocent, face, convinced the police that this young boy was his gay lover and that they were having a fight. And they released him, to Jeffrey Dahmer, and he was killed, within half an hour. And so there's this, there's this construction of a premature adultification of Asian American youth that at the same time coexists with a perpetual infantilization that I'm writing about in a series of films about model minority Asian youth and the college admissions process and how they forever, and ever represent their family in terms of how they fare, in that process. So I'm interested in, attachment relationships, not only between parents and children in this new book, but also ours towards images as hitting the affective in order to calm our suffering. That is, films capture embodied feelings that words may not solely express. So the psychoanalyst of attachment, John Bowlby, who studied relations between children and their parents, says there is no stronger feeling than the behavior of attachment. So one way to measure the child's attachment is through the deployment of different kinds of crying and the response of the mother or parental caregiver. Bowlby says that crying is elicited by a number of quite different conditions, including hunger and pain, which is more powerful. It's hard to tell, right? Because, pain stimulates hurry on the part of parents, but hunger, a more leisurely response from the parents, the sources of which indeed are anxiety that can also lead to anger. So I write about Asian American cinema in terms of attachment because of our feelings about them as generated by racial ones, where images hold and contain trauma and also address it. What I find powerful and promising in Asian American cinema today as a scholar and filmmaker whose entire career now and in the future is devoted to Asian American cinema is how it chooses to regard racialization as much needed in the work of representation. Stephen Yun, in an interview with the Lincoln Center in late December, says that Minari is an inside view of the family from our perspective as we lived it, liberated from the mainland home gaze and the majority American gaze. The immigrant experience is its own thing. And Stephen Yun is on the cover of GQ this past month and saying these very complicated things about the silences of Asian Americans, what it means to be nominated and to be hyper visible and continue to be invisible. So there's this particular experience of being, subjugated as a confrontation with a historical moment that you can tell in the way he speaks about film and the way he speaks about his position. And it gives rise to how so much emotion, still needs to be expressed and exploited and explored on screen. We have not yet felt all that we can feel in the movies, especially if we don't undo its harm with pleasure, affirmation, and relief, like the stories of young Asian American women on screen that's kept me alive for the past year. And I list them here to you as a gift, because if you haven't seen them, it'll be just a good balm. I'm going to move on to the second part of my talk today, which is to talk about my own practice as a filmmaker that subscribes to this belief. 10 years in the making, my new film, The Celine Archive, which I just completed this past year, digs up the story of a Filipinx immigrant woman, Celine Navarro, buried alive by her community in Northern California in 1932. I used the medium of film to reconstitute her skin and her flesh in an extension of Hortense Spiller's formulation regarding the bodily subjection of Black women. Celine's bodily movements and her fearful feelings and the experience of being abducted, harassed, kidnapped, and eventually killed by her community need to emerge. Through archival images, newspaper headlines, and articles that rendered Celine Navarro an adulteress and a thief, as well as interviews with her family, scholars, poets, and community members who offered a different version of her, I interrogate why we repress herstories of the brutalization of women in favor of a community's victimization from racism, or the heroism of men who have dominated the teaching and scholarship of Filipinx America. Films show us so much more through the content, through the context that the fuller story can tell beyond specific newspaper photos or even whispered stories in the night. When I first encountered Celine Navarro's story in the 1990s, when I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley, not much was known about Filipinx American women in the earlier 20th century. Historians like Ron Takaki attributed the lack of attention paid to their outnumbering by men at 1 to 14 among a new California population, 30 to 40,000 strong in the 20s and 30s. Today, Filipinx are the largest American group in California, Asian American group in California. What does it mean for Californians not to know her story? What does it mean that she is unknown by women interested in fathoming the lives of their pioneering foremothers? So when I was an undergraduate at Cal in the 90s, I was alerted to Celine's story in the Bancroft Library archives by my sister, who was researching white women considered trash and Filipinx men regarded as brown monkeys. These are two marginalized groups who forged alliance in the earlier 20th century in taxi dance halls when Filipinx were lynched and their rooming houses torched in towns like Stockton, where they were segregated from whites. Eugenics and anti-miscegenation laws meant their interracial ties could lead to death. Filipinx American history, dominated by narratives of men, meant finding Celine in the archives was rare, particularly a Filipinx immigrant woman with the French name that we share. I would meet others in the Filipinx community in California who told me they experienced Celine's story as a fearsome tale told during bedtime rituals. Community members growing up in the Central Valley would come across old timers whispering about a woman buried alive with her hand sticking out of the ground. Accounts of a disheveled and dirty woman clad in white walking the Sacramento Delta's rugged roadways arose. Hers was seemingly an eerie, malevolent ghost story that traveled to California and the Filipinx diaspora. So the man on the right is Alex Fabros, a community scholar, and the man on the left is Henny Navarro, Celine Navarro's grandson, who I found in the process of my research. So as a filmmaker and film scholar working on gender, race, sexuality, and transnationalism, Celine Navarro's story stayed with me for more than 2 decades. And while I was a professor at UC Santa Barbara, for 15 years before my current job, I began scouring the archives to find stories of a group of Filipinx women and men who accused her of infidelity, kidnapped her, and made her crawl on beans, then picked stones out of a bag to decide who would start throwing them at her. Celine and her husband were part of this fraternal organization that killed her. The membership records document all of the names of her purported killers, along with hers and her husband. News of the trial of Celine Navarro's indicted killers traveled the world from Los Angeles to New York to London and Singapore. Fascination about the growing number of Filipinx in America fueled interest in her story because the debates about their inability to assimilate dominated the era. The media reflected a national fear of Filipinx and their essential otherness. Headlines used words like voodoo ritual, strange cult, weird trial, jungle justice, and kangaroo court that emphasized them as suspect. The primary story that emerged across global media was one of her as an adulteress who betrayed her sick husband, then perversely punished by a bizarre community who considered her a traitor to their moral code. Was she a wanton woman who followed a brazen sexual freedom, picking from the plentiful abundance of men, and thus deserved punishment for moral turpitude? In the courts, the group accused of killing her were acquitted. I learned that the organization collected funds from all their members to defend her indicted killers within the context of disproving the community's perceived incompatibility with citizenship. So in this way, the entire community sacrificed not only Celine's life, but her place in Filipinx American history. Scholars like Rick Baldos, Dorothy Cordova, and Don Mabalon, the late great Don Mabalon, disclosed that she was a heroine, a pioneer of the Me Too movement, and how she testified against a group of men who beat up another man for protecting a white woman from her husband. a known abuser in the community. Celine Navarro's testimony sent 4 Filipinx men to San Quentin prison, gaining the community's ire, for they were determined to uphold loyalty and secrecy during a time of intense racial ostracism. So this is one of the proudest facts of the movie for me, is to bring together in conversation all of these scholars from the Filipinx community. Celine's own family tells a different story. In the audio recordings in the archives of the Filipinx American National Historical Society in Seattle, her sisters shared how Celine was hunted down by a man who desired her and whose wife hated her. Celine's husband encouraged her to submit to his advances. According to her sisters, whom she visited in Ventura, a mere 10 miles away from my own house when I was doing this research, was where she went right before she died. Her sister said Celine was a scaredy cat, timid girl, neglected by her shirker husband, and vulnerable to predation as a mom, living in precarity and impecunity. This is a big deal, right? Because when you learn about Filipinx American history, there's this romantic image of the Filipinx, male farm worker, migrant farm worker, the manong, who's dressed in this amazing denim, riding up and down the coast in this romantic image of a sexually desirable, romanticized, man. But here he was, really sacrificing his wife and family's, health. So there are numerous descendants of her 4 children, over 100. They remember her sacrifice as if she died yesterday rather than 88 years ago. They make sure to pass on her story within their family, collecting the few publications available to validate their memories. So they take Alex Fabros's work, Don Mabalon's work, and they hold on to it because it's a record of what is in the oral history of their family, but they don't find it anywhere else. It's a very different story than what's in the popular media of the time. So I wanted to center her story as an unjust killing that privileges her family, for whom I wanted to bring peace, rather than recreate the trauma of her story's burial. A socially just, non-extractive mission in making a film about her meant acknowledging her physical torture and psychic torment as not merely a ghost or a flimsy caricature of our past. And I definitely did not want to do a Law and Order forensic files thing where I was going to hear, from the killer. I really wanted to center her family. And the reason why I made this directorial decision with unflinching clarity is my own experience with a traumatic death in my own family. 2 years after starting work on the film, my 8-year-old son, Lacoste, suddenly died within 24 hours of a virus attacking his healthy heart. Since Lacoste's death, the question of how a family who encounters the sudden death of a loved one continues to live and even thrive is something I think about every day. How does the next generation remember the loss and pass on the transformative suffering that the unexpected death of a loved one brings to the family? My film must not cruelly re-traumatize the family, but help them create a new narrative. Celine's story can too easily be told salaciously, and to do so about a community already criminalized in history would be unjust. To examine intergenerational trauma would ultimately reconstitute her, flesh her back to life as a counter to her erasure. She deserves a place in history that regularly recounts stories about racism, but suppresses the sexism the community perpetrates. As an historian of representations, what is stunning about Celine's story is how it maps the timeline of Filipinx American history of the last century. Born in 1904, Celine arrived in the US in 1918, and up until her death in 1932, traveled regularly between the Philippines and the US at a time of Asian exclusion. Unlike other Asians, Filipinx were considered nationals and provided a leading source of cheap labor. She first dropped her kids in the Philippines as her husband's tuberculosis worsened and her own experiences with the fraternal organization escalated. She was kidnapped and tortured at least twice for weeks at a time by a group of men. The third time is when she returned to Stockton to transport her dying husband home for a dignified death in the Philippines. She instead experiences incomprehensibly final brutality. their kids orphaned and Filipinx reclassified in 1934's Tidings-McDuffie Act, her descendants were unable to return until after 1965. When they came back, they immediately tried to find her story in her grave. Celine's story also rewrites how we understand and practice belonging within a community. Whenever I see fellow Filipinx Americans, conversations ensue where we try to see if we're related or share the same regional roots or find the best Filipino meal nearby. For Celine's family to see other Filipinx is to ask them if they were part of the group of people who killed their matriarch, the one who traveled to America and started her American family. Bringing her story and the experiences of her family to light challenges the concept of a cohesive ethnic community and the hierarchies, and exposes the hierarchies that organize communities by gender and sexuality. Celine's life shows how women in early Filipinx American history were actional. Her mother, Juana Montaire, traveled from the Philippines as a widow with 3 daughters in 1918. Their migration explodes the primary narrative that men were the ones who traversed continents to move to the US. So this is a big deal. Celine's own story, whether adulteress, traitor, heroine, or prey, shows how she acted courageously throughout her life. She moved here, lived a life with various versions of bravery and endurance, and finally saved her children before her death. The multitudes that compose her descendants are Filipinx, Black, Latinx, queer, and more. They look like America and are Americans. She is our history. Celine Navarro's story is considered a haunting, not by her family who lives with her story, but by Filipinx Americans who keep hush hush, diminishing the violence she experienced by calling her a ghost or simply refusing the truths of her story. Celine Navarro sheds light on the experiences of women in Filipinx American history and the unfinished mysteries that we hold in our collective American story. Racism is not the primary force that structured their community. Within it, misogyny transpired that Celine Navarro's life and death make known. In this way, the racial dramas that do justice to the stories of people marginalized by dominant narratives acknowledge hierarchies within specific communities. This commitment organizes the entirety of my filmmaking and scholarship, focused on the archive of images that compose Asian America. By focusing on the ethnic specific stories, I am thinking not only about race as a constitutive factor in the many cultural productions I analyze, but the specificities of various histories, geographies, and practices, showing the pressure points between gender and sexuality and race that remain a tension in Asian American studies today. So the body of my scholarship focuses on sexuality and race as historically and theoretically imbricated identities and processes, including how exploitation and inequality occur in these relations, but do not prevent the existence of pleasure. Race is shaped by sexuality and vice versa, and for Asian Americans, this is particularly sharp. Racial difference has been genitally defined as intrinsic to the biology of hypersexual Asian women, as perpetually available in my first book, or in the fraught construction of Asian men in a limited straitjacket of masculinity in my second book, or in the unequal sexual relations between and in Asian America and Asia that I engage in my current work. And in all of my books, essays, and films, I attend to the ties that bind Asian and Asian American cultural productions, using representation as a way to bridge between these two areas that are increasingly linked in the traffic of people and goods today. So you'll see, I wrote this essay that's widely available online about the online YouTube discovery of Arnel Perneda, the lead singer of the international American rock band Journey. I hope you get a chance to read it. Or in the fraught construction of Asian men in the limited straitjacket of masculinity that you can see in this essay that I wrote on Bruce Lee. Asian and Asian America, haunt each other very specifically in all of these films, whether it's in the cultural expectations or the relentless questioning of belonging in the US. Asian America is both local and global, and this is really captured in Bruce Lee's life. He was born in the US, moved back to Hong Kong, came back to the US, but could not really establish his stardom until he went back to Hong Kong, and then made his final films here with the power of Hollywood. So in all of my books, essays, and films, I talk about race, sexuality, and transnationalism. So my third book, The Proximity of Other Skins, stretches more fully the frame of Asian American cinema to the global, particularly in terms of intimacy at the site of inequality. I'm particularly struck by what happens when we witness on-screen relations that feature the denigration endured by the abjected. So you're not just you're not just objectified, but you're dehumanized as abject, the wretched of the earth, and how their representations, the abjected Asian and Asian Americans, attempt to implicate Western audiences. The encounter with these films may lead us to an awareness of our power as Asian Americans, as transnational audiences, to name and define whom we see as subject, who is a subject, who is an other, who is an object, who is abjected. So I'm going to talk about a particular chapter as the final step in this talk today. So in the opening chapter of this current work, I show how Filipinx filmmakers in the diaspora craft a new language for thinking about abjection. Queer Filipinx filmmaker Gerardo Calagi rewrites the narrative of denigration for Filipinx trans women in his fiction film, Mga Gabing Kasing Haba ng Hair Ko, or Those Long-Haired Nights, made in 2017, by amplifying the ceaseless violence structuring their lives. This occurs relentlessly inside and outside their bodies at the sites of sex, family, and work. In the first vignette of his film, the Filipinx trans woman Tuesday, the woman in the yellow cardigan, meets a young, handsome, fit, white privileged, cisgendered male professional rugby player from Sri Lanka who presents as heterosexual. They meet on the street. It's the frame on the top left of your screen. And a flirtation ensues that leads to them checking into a nearby hotel. As they walk into their room in the dark and narrow hallway, they encounter a group of giggling cisgendered Filipinx women who blatantly evaluate Tuesday from head to toe with their discerning eyes. Uncomfortable with their measurement of her gendered presentation, she looks down self-consciously. This is a very different interaction from the frame on your bottom left, that it's a flirtation that just occurred in the elevator, an isolated space away from others, where she is confident and playfully twirls her long hair as she looks at the John. From the mirror behind her, we see him staring with desire and a slight smile. When they enter the hotel suite moments later, he aggressively turns the massage she performs into a much more sexual interaction. To get out of the quickly escalated sexual scene, she retreats to the bathroom, makes sure to turn on her phone, and calls her security, the man on the top right, for a possible rescue. When she returns to the bedroom with the excuse of her period and the proof of blood, lipstick smeared on her toilet paper, the John won't stop expressing his wishes, saying, "I don't care." This statement frightens Tuesday, who frantically acts to prevent his discovery of her genitalia by running away from the bed into the bathroom again. She's crying and shaking as he breaks down the door. This scene of Tuesday on the floor near the toilet when he bursts in directly alludes to the 2014 death of the Filipinx trans sex worker Jennifer Laude, who was drowned in a toilet bowl by her John. What is different, however, is the life-affirming fiction of the Calagi film. When he slams inside the bathroom, the Sri Lankan John instead lovingly cradles Tuesday's face with the toilet still in frame. Though she is trembling in fear, he declares his desire for her, saying, "I like ladyboys," as he tenderly approaches her face for a kiss, waiting for her consent. This film about trans women by a gay filmmaker recasts the trajectory of death to one of unexpected life and struggle. In its focus on the sex scene between Tuesday and the John, the film addresses what happens in the sexual transaction between unequals, a very real desire and pleasure grounded in difference that costs the Filipinx trans woman a great deal more. Tuesday goes from feelings of absolute fear to an unexpected surrender to pleasure. In this scene, we can see this on her face as her eyes close, as her shoulders and legs ease into vulnerable relaxation, and in the complete release of her bodily tension. Desire at the site of inequality not only arises, but also exposes the undeniable presence of inequity in these relations. Her change from terror to rapture shows the stability of the ego of the John, who is there to extract pleasure for himself. He does not seem alarmed at all. He doesn't even notice the intensity of her fear, or how she anxiously interprets the bold declaration of his desire. He is so entirely self-centered in his pursuit of pleasure through her that he does not notice her feelings. In their private encounter, his desire provokes deathly dread for her, but he interprets it differently as part of the erotic exchange that serves him. In this way, her fear is an erotic part of his pleasure. This shows how Tuesday lives in a different place, even in their shared space, where nearness to him means the imminence of her own death. She struggles to judge her own worth in proximity to danger. In the struggle to decipher the hatred that could emerge in the sight of lovemaking, she does not entirely know if she will fight. She moves toward death just in case on the other side she finds payment, validation, pleasure, or affirmation in an otherwise hostile world. Her sexuality is anxious and insecure. His sexuality is flexible and carefree. His pliability makes visible his self-certainty, while the rigidity caging her gender crossing is the opposite, her being for others. Despite exposing inequality at the site of intimacy, Kalagi does make a problematic directorial choice in casting 3 heterosexual male heartthrobs in the role of trans women, while actual trans women populate the periphery of the film. The feature documentary Call Her Ganda by the queer Filipinx-American director PJ Raval confronts the undeniably brutal murder of trans Filipinx sex worker Jennifer Laude in the hands of a white American GI. Though the GI admitted to killing her and was found guilty, the US government intervened so that he was never detained by authorities in the Philippines where he was tried. So when he was pronounced guilty, I think a group of 6 American military men surrounded him and just ran him out of the hall. The Philippine government couldn't even take hold of him. And most recently, President Duterte absolutely pardoned the American GI, which Laude's family blames on the Philippines' inability to fight the US, indicating the ongoing legacy of their unequal status as colonizer and colony. Raval's documentary presents not only the rallying cry of a nation that protests her abjection, but also shows how this movement is grounded in the unconditional love of her family and transgender community. Jennifer Laude's mom explains how she calls her daughter Ganda, which means beautiful, in the naming that Jennifer used for herself as a child. Her mom shows us her acceptance. Jennifer's German fiance declares his devotion to her too, while acknowledging her job as a sex worker. Her trans women friends show how highly they regarded Jennifer's leadership among their group. If you look at that shot that the filmmaker used to represent his film, it's one where he frames Jennifer's mother on the bottom left of your screen, holding Jennifer's photo while speaking with and looking at the Filipinx trans woman journalist, Meredith Talusan's camera. This framing shows, her solemn devotion to her daughter. And this directorial decision prioritized not only rendering Jennifer as someone who was intensely loved by her mother, but who was also represented by a movement of trans women seeking justice for her. This image supports others in the film as her mother stands solidly and irrefutably with trans and other women outside the courthouse, together beleaguered by the many bureaucratic obstacles of fighting against the US military complex, all in the midst of torrential rains and floods. Interviewed in the film, the Filipinx transgender activist Naomi Fonseca, who's the woman in the top right of your screen on the left in the 3 shot. She links the status of the US as a colonizer and the Philippines as a colony to their status and activism as trans women, including spotlighting the severity of the discrimination they face due to gender as they rally for justice. Interviews conducted by Raval emphasize her dignity, the dignity of trans women as leaders, waving the trans flag alongside the Philippine flag. The gay filmmaker essentially asserts that he cannot make this film without privileging the voices, relations, and actions of Filipinx trans women. In having the trans community guide the film, Raval ensures their voices are amplified when they too are frequently erased. The inhuman murder of Jennifer Laude, as chronicled in the documentary Call Her Ganda, provides evidence for the fear that structures the lives of Filipinx trans women. The soldier claims that he killed Jennifer after realizing it was a man performing a sexual act on him. Essentially, the murderer used his bigotry to defend himself by saying that his ego was threatened by his desire for the abject. This really resonates, right, with the Atlanta shooter's claim that he needed to eliminate the temptations that these women represented. So when the murderer fears the significance of contact with someone he regarded as contaminating and corrupting, and there's a long history of Asian Americans attributed with that kind of damaging contact, he reduces her to filth in the way he killed her. The social meaning of sex between radically unequal people manifests in the way the powerful regard others. The killer treated her like a non-subject, the object of denigration, whose sexual encounter with his body dirties him enough to convince himself to justify his violent response, making her literally abject, at one with fecal matter in putting her head in the toilet. Resonates with Julia Kristeva's theorization of abjection as the insecurity of the subject with power who fears becoming rotten through his own desire. The two queer Filipinx filmmakers, Kalagi and Raval, craft a film language that highlights the psychic and structural violence permeating Filipinx trans women's lives. In their work, we see the power of Asian and Asian American film and its ability to capture the trans women sex worker struggles to make their lives matter, and in amplifying the national outcry to secure justice for trans women, especially when we pay attention to how the films are shot in space and in the particular objects deployed to communicate the scenes. Those Long-Haired Nights is shot in Burgos, the red light district of Manila, and its cramped, dark, and dingy alleyways, streets, hallways, rooms, and elevators that all teem with people. Call Her Ganda highlights the turbulent weather, the lights of the nightclubs, and the precarious homes composed of concrete blocks to communicate the disadvantaged position from which Lauda's family and friends speak. Objects, including relations with others, spaces, and things, reveal what representation can do, which is to externalize the psyche, how one makes sense of one's place in the world and one's feelings about that experience, including one's entitlement over others. In conclusion, films are vehicles to help us hear collective trauma and pain. In experiencing these images that hold and contain deep distress, movies make lived inequities known so we can address our wounding, seek justice, and mobilize action. The people in my final slide come from many sectors of the Filipinx diaspora, holding up signs that assert a connection to Jennifer Laude so she is not ignored and does not remain unheard. For the past 20 years, my work shows Asian American legibility on screen as sites of harm, and the very same site where we can address those injuries to help us live happier, healthier, and fuller lives. Indeed, director Lee Isaac Chung describes how he showed Minari to his family over Thanksgiving. Through it, he says, we recognized our struggle with each other and how we made it to the other side. We have a better relationship because we now see each other. Lacking the capacity for words over decades, he had to go to the image to represent his family's trauma and grief. Depictions of racialized sexuality in the lives of Celine Navarro, Tuesday, and Jennifer Laude reveal scorned subjects deserving of our fearless attention towards the goals of similar coherence and reconstitution. We must not run away from their lives and turn away from them, but instead imagine them alive through the feelings and actions of those they left behind, activists and filmmakers both. As a filmmaker and film scholar, films can help us to find a kind of earned, secure attachment that is to move away from the insecurity that the trauma of race and representation inflicts towards continually looking at and making images that let us imagine something different. In confronting power relations, whether it's in the hierarchies of gender and sex that result in the killing of Celine Navarro, or the abjection that led to Jennifer Laude's murder, the films I present to you today prioritize marginalized voices within marginalized communities, so we may experience what the imagistic can do beyond the linguistic. Trauma demands representation so as to create new realities, worlds where Celine Navarro and Jennifer Laude both get to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful and moving talk. So we can take questions. We have about 20, 25 minutes. If folks want to just type into the chat box that you have a question, we can take people in order that way.
I have one question from Jimin Fei.
Yeah.
So Jimin Fei asks, what are your thoughts on thinking about the gifts that you gave us about the Netflix films that you shared? What are your thoughts on the new Disney animated movie Raya, which depicts a female Southeast Asian main character in culture? And how do you view Asian American representation in TV today through popular media channels such as Disney, Netflix? Thank you so much for your
There's
talk.
so much going on, right? I mean, they are gifts to us. You know, there are generations of Asian American filmmakers, you know, who have been working in this medium for decades. You know, one question that was recently asked of me of a major, you know, news agency was, you know, what's happening now? Why did Asian American cinema start with Minari? And I thought, oh my God, you know, like what else can we do in terms of a 50+ year history of Asian American cinema scholarship, you know, 100+ year history of Asian American filmmaking, you know, in Hollywood, Seshua Hayakawa. So, you know, there's this tension of, you know, giving them the gift of not doing the work and having the scholars do the work, you know, of sharing the scholarship so that it can be broadcasted. But there's this insistence of a kind of amnesia, you know, about the work that we are doing as scholars. And at the same time, our work as scholars, the work of nonprofit media organizations like Visual Communication, Center for Asian American Media, are precisely the ones that have bolstered and strengthened and given opportunities to the filmmakers that Hollywood is, you know, celebrating now. The New York Times had a huge spread maybe a month ago on Asian American cinema and cited no one, and asked the very same questions of the very first essays that was published on Asian American cinema 50 years ago. You know, so there's a real problem there. And I do think the solution is in young people like yourselves, you know, the many people who are, you know, in this Zoom room, and what you're going to do in the future to bring together, you know, the scholarship, the activism, the media. And it includes writing about the media that we are seeing in the past year, you know, the work of Alice Wu, not only in Saving Face 20 years ago, but the half of it, this quiet, queer, romantic coming of age, young adult romance, you know. So there's much to be said, but there's much to be acknowledged. We owe a huge debt, for example, to Mira Nair, you know, who in the 90s was making similar films. And we cannot accept this amnesia that is being imposed on us, you know, by the media. And so it is our work to acknowledge our predecessors and our pioneering ancestors on whose shoulders we stand. Yeah, so enjoy as much as we can the work of Jenny Han, etc. But we have to follow the lead of our foremothers and forefathers, you know, working in this industry, and don't render them into invisibility.
Thank you.
Don't be shy. Yeah, Chandan.
Chandan, we were just in a meeting together.
It's great to see you again, Celine, like an hour later. That talk was absolutely breathtaking and brilliant, and just left me with so many thoughts and questions. And I really appreciated your sense of trying to rethink Asian American history and the Asian American past as a genealogy of gendered violence and the mechanisms of its burial. That how people try to bury gendered violence, whether in a toilet or through stoning, et cetera, is part of the stories we need to tell. And I was really moved by it. And I'm curious about the tension between your opening remarks around Minari and Sandra Oh, and the expression of tears and grief around suppressed histories, or the experience of having invisibility for so long. And then your later remarks about the sort of prior forms of Asian filmmaking and that were actually much more located within kind of liberation idioms of anger and rage. And I'm wondering, you know, in that final scene, in that final part of your talk where you're looking at the mother's holding of the portrait and the newspaper reporter's phone, there's a kind of tableau of medias being represented. You know, the private portrait, the cell phone, the newspaper, and then the documentary film that is framing all of that or giving us that image. And I'm wondering which kinds of relations to media we might need to make the kind of alternative representation possible in relationship to our traumatic histories. Because the Sandra Oh stuff struck me as very much a milieu in which it's like online culture, where the entire sense of visibility has been surrendered to the media apparatus itself, versus the stronger sense of mediation that you get in the context of the mother holding the portrait of her slain daughter, and a much different sense of the role of media in relationship to subjectivity in that context of the Philippines. So I'm wondering how you've thought, or how you think about when you're doing filmic work in the context of, you know, the differences between how people consume media in the kind of social media world of the US, you know, where the pathos is so strong to the media itself, like to the machinery of the media, versus when it circulates in other kinds of spaces where the relationship to social media is it doesn't exist or is so different. How you've thought about how that impacts whether or not representation can be an effective mechanism in relationship to traumatic histories.
Thank you, Chandan.
Sorry for that long-winded question. I'm having a hard time pulling it out.
I want to say three things, I guess. The first is that, you know, when you say about, you know, the toilet and the stoning and the burial of women's stories, I'm just astounded in seeing that transpire with the Atlanta shootings, you know, and how, you know, even in, I mean, there are a lot of offensive articles at the same time that there are a lot of really empowering and productive articles. But one article stunned me, which was like one that started linking like the feminization of Asian men and did not want anything to do with what the women were undergoing. And then I myself, when I started publishing, I started getting mail, you know, from men that said things like, but don't you know that it's really Asian women who are in power? And they actually oppress men with their sexual lures, you know? So they were saying these very same things that the killer was essentially saying. So I'm just stunned at our capacity to repress the brutalization that women undergo, and to see it so publicly now is really hard to take, actually. And the second thing is, you know, like your identification of crying, you know, that I talked about with Sandra Oh and Stephen Yun. I'm thinking a lot about crying, and I'm looking for things to read on crying because, you know, recently I went back home to where I grew up in Boston, and I didn't realize how hard it was to grow up there, you know, like with a family of, I think at the time there were only 6 kids in my family. And, you know, being a Filipino immigrant family, there were, you know, just families living with us. And I brought my kids there and I stood outside, and it was like, you know, the projects, you know, like, you know, where breakdancing was born, you know, like but I remember just standing there, and I was just so happy getting out of the car and showing my kids, here's where I live. And I stood there and I looked up, and then I just started crying, like this kind of crying where my face wasn't like ugly, like it just was flat, but then the tears were like buckets. And I was like, what is this? It was, it was this emergence of all of just how hard it was, just the pain and the loss and the grief. And so I'm really thinking about that, like the immigrant experience of loss through crying, and then the own crying we experience when watching films about immigration. So I'm really thinking about the attachment that we have to representation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to answer your question, what is the impact, of representation? Can it do this work? Can it do the kind of effective, work that we need? And my answer is a wholehearted yes. I don't know, like what it looks like, but I do know that it has to be a continued, engagement with it, whether it's the making of it or it's processing it, through our own writing. But what I do know is that it's too rare an experience to even see films like this. 88, depends on what data you're looking at, USC or UCLA, 88 to 96% are made by white men that we popularly see. I mean, that's a colonization, So there's much work to do. And I think the answer is yes. I don't quite know what it looks like. And I look forward to seeing what we do. And I'm so happy to be in a film school where I can see the students just exceed my dreams in terms of what they're doing with, illustrating and helping me to feel, their situations. And I teach in a school where it's, 60% are Pell Grant receiving, 80% students of color,
Well, then I just have to say separately that your own project, Celine, and your film on Celine, the other, the Celine that you were willing to be ghosted by and taken up by, is transformative.
Yeah.
And is doing something that nothing else out there does. And we are so lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. It looks like the film it was going to be distributed by Women Make Movies. So it'll be available to education, et cetera, but it's going to screen live for the first time, I think, in New York next month, like with the whole red carpet thing. So I'm excited, and I'm going to bring the whole family, let them know it's happening, and we'll see, because we've never seen it together. We've only seen it, in this kind of situation. But yeah, so I think that also answers your question, Chandan, right?
Yeah.
That the making of the film can do that work, not only for me, but for the family,
The families, yep.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so nice to engage with you.
Connie, did you want to share what you put in the chat?
Celine, thank you so much. So great to see you anyway. And actually, I was just thinking about some of the things back at Berkeley and about the crying. And so I'll talk to you more about later, especially at the conference that we had gone to. I'm sure you know I'm talking about with your mom was there and other people. But it made me think about that. And because of that, I was thinking about, The Curse of Guangdong. I forgot the director's name, but she's supposed to be the first Asian American director. And even then, she decided to depict the whole thing about the misogyny in the Chinese families, and a lot of it was lost and all that stuff. But I just thought that in the broader picture about people wanting to express themselves and how they're forgotten and such, I just kind of mentioned that maybe you should think about The Curse of Guangdong too. And again, her take on what happened and the Chinese community in general. And again, the women want to express themselves. And I always think it's interesting. A lot of times it's much more the women than what's been given credit for in a lot of what we're all teaching in terms of Asian American studies, given the textbooks and so forth. But I thought about that one because she was talking about her sister in-law's subservience and the whole concubinage and the issue about Guangdong and so forth, even though the production itself is lost because they couldn't find all of it. I know Arthur Dong tried to piece parts of it, but I also thought it was still about women who are forgotten and how even though it cost the family a lot of money, they weren't wealthy or anything, she tried to do what she can to express herself as a woman. So I was thinking about that and how in many communities, again, inspired by what I know in terms of what had happened in the past and thing, people are trying to express themselves the best they can. And it's, to me, the way we all read it and the way I read what The Curse of Guangdong did is just that you need to express yourself because it's not there. Whether or not it's accurate, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just that it's still very inspiring to see people giving voice to some of the feelings, the desire to cry, just the happiness, the joy of crying as well. When you do see someone talking about what you have been thinking about, even though it might have been 80 years before you. So I just want to say that I just mentioned that in there as something that you might also look at. I'm sure
Yeah.
you know that one already, but that's the way it had inspired me. And I think a lot of other Chinese Americans, even though we only saw 1/4 or maybe a third of the entirety of the film, but it's still the woman's desire to talk about something, to re-examine the trauma, what was going on at the time. So
Yeah.
that was just one of her comment. But thank you so much, Celine. That was really a great talk. So good to see you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm familiar with that because there was a filmmaker who was at Rutgers, Japanese American woman. Anyway, she made an award-winning film about her, the pioneering filmmaker. But I'm just kind of taken aback right now because, I'm thinking a lot about, our losses in the past 13, 14 months. And, for my family, we lost an entire generation, like half to COVID, half to, other things, but we couldn't have a funeral, And so my mom also died like 18 months ago. So when Connie mentioned this event, I think it might be related to the next film that I'm envisioning, but I was, an activist for women of color issues at UC Berkeley, because it was the heyday, of just awesomeness at Cal, where, June Jordan was there, Shri Moraga, Trinity Minhan, they were all working with us so closely. And there was a famous conference called the Empowering Women of Color Conference. And Connie and I were at this just beautiful setting, and maybe 50 or 60 women. And I was presenting, and my mom was there with her best friend, who was a Black woman. And she disclosed publicly for the very first time to me and my sisters who happened to be in the group, and Connie was there, just her experiences of sexual violence as a girl. It was one of the most, traumatic and transformative experiences of my life. So Connie just mentioning that just now, just helps me to think about, I think I'm going deeper into both experiences of the intensity of sexual violence and sexual pleasure, that Asian American women experience. Like, what do you do growing up as an Asian American woman, in terms of being inflicted with a hyper heterosexualization, whether you're a queer woman or otherwise, but it's something that you have to contend with, and I'm just starting to talk to people about it, and there's a question on the chat that says, how are you able to talk about these issues of trauma and violence? Why do you even go there? And what enables you to do it? And I think I'm not afraid of my vulnerability at all. And I hope, that the people I talk with, recognize that, and we can go somewhere together. But I think maybe just recognizing the precarity of life, and how I have to make this work that I hope hits people, but also helps me to understand what happened to me and my 7 sisters who grew up in a household where my mom underwent such horrific sexual violence, but could only tell us in public, but never alluded to it before or after that, But I mean, yeah.
I remember she had you guys leave at this conference. I was the facilitator, and it was I remember you asked me why, and I asked you to ask her because we felt, but it was again her indirectly telling you was, and I always thought about that time still. People want to tell others, but they can't tell the person they probably should tell the most. But she wanted support from us, so she knew how to tell you. Is what I always kind of thought about it in that way. So what happens? And then Celine went and talked, and they had this conversation, and I remember it was transformative for all of us because we all thought about what it would probably take for our parents and for us to tell our parents about things that happened. So I kind of thought about it in terms of your film as I was watching about that moment, because again, it was a very powerful moment, and at that conference, and I was one of the organizers. I think there were about 100 people, but in that room there were about 70. But I think it's just the fact that we need support, and your mom, because she heard about all these other people's traumas, she felt supported enough to trust all of us. And then after that, she trusted you. But and again, I know you and I, here we are, it's been over like 30 years, and we're still thinking about that. And I also think I agree with you. A lot of our students when they also share, because we don't know what they're going to share. We don't even know whether it's truthful or not. But when they do this, it always makes us go back, and it reminds you of why it is that people have to express themselves, why people need to write and our humanity. So Celine, thank you, because again, it brought back a lot of those memories for me as you went through this, and of course, all those theorists. Okay.
Yeah,
So.
and I think it says a lot about this space: ethnic studies, sexuality studies, queer studies, and what can be unearthed there, so we can really understand each other.
Yeah, so I think we have time for maybe one more question. Erica asked about how you heal and move beyond these stories. I'm going to answer for Celine and say she's very good at taking care of herself. She drinks a lot of water, does a lot of yoga. She goes yes, she's very, very good at taking care of herself. Do we have maybe one more question?
We have a question from Roxanne. So Roxanne asks, you wrote and spoke on ways the systems of imperialism and colonialism, militarization contribute to the killing of Jennifer Lade in the Philippines and women in Atlanta. What can Filipino Americans and others do to counter the systems that cause and enable this type of violence?
There are so many fronts to the struggle, and I think it's really finding your own strength and and your own passion, essentially, because it's going to be very hard work, and every one of us will have a place in it, and I think to avoid the binaries that lead to beliefs that say there's structural change and there's psychic change, but I do think that all of these are really interrelated. Like, I really don't like the claim that says representations don't lead to structural change and there's a passivity in watching movies, but movies can enable you to find the strength to express things, and to leave your house, to enter different rooms. And so you have to find your way and to really dig deep, double down on getting as strong as you can, to contribute to helping alleviate these social problems that you will have a role, but you have to find the best way to do it, whether it's scholarship, activism, or something else. But it will, make sense for you if it accounts for your whole life. That's what I hope for you, at least, young people at UW.
Thank you so much. We have one more question. I don't know if we have time. I know that class is ending soon. What do you?
Yeah, we have a couple minutes, so.
Okay. So Stephanie, do you want to just ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for this talk. And I'm teaching a class right now on racialized representations of gender, basically, and sexuality, and we're doing your work next week. So thank you for it. I want to hear a little bit about the relationships between how you think about what I'll call your critical work and your creative work, but maybe those names are wrong, because like I hear like what film can do, and I'm curious what scholarship can do. And I'm thinking of this question in the context of like the class that I'm teaching, where I'm supposed to be teaching, like, it's called critical practice, and I'm supposed to be teaching like academic writing and using theory. And I find myself re-traumatizing my students, especially my students of color, and I don't want to do that. And I'm thinking what else? And I find myself like, what else we can do is often like breaking from the like kind of academic forms of writing. But the talk you gave today was like kind of, to me, like academic paper, right? So anyway, so I'm curious, what can the critical practice or scholarly writing do affectively? Yeah, that's the question. And do we have to break from these genres?
I was talking to my friend, my friend Viet. I'm not saying that because he's like so famous, but my friend Viet Wen, who I'm always talking to because I'm always stunned. Like whenever I see him, I'm like, well, there's a security guard between us. I thought we were friends, but it's because you're so famous now, but he's always telling me like, oh, academics just need to do a better job writing. But I really don't think like that. I really don't. I think that there's writing that's required for certain kind of ideas, and I can't imagine doing it in a way. I can't imagine doing it differently, I guess. I mean, maybe that's why I work in many media. There are certain things that are films, and there are certain things that are books, essays, articles. And right now, what I'm learning, in the aftermath of Atlanta is that, I'm being called a lot, like I'm going to be on the Oprah version in Canada, talking to these people. And it's so challenging and exciting to me to have to speak in a certain way to communicate everything that I know, but in a really distilled way. And, I'm talking to my editor who published The Hypersexuality of Race in 2007. And we're talking about like a shorter version that kind of updates the hypersexuality of race in relation to what happened in Atlanta. So I'm excited about those challenges. But right now I'm working on this, what I presented to you today, which is like attachment theory, and crying and attachment in relation to film and the kind of security that you get from certain kinds of entanglements with movies that you can't get elsewhere. And I can't worry about, like this needs to be trade. This needs to be understood. I mean, I need to be able to respect the enterprise of what we do in the academy, which is it requires quiet, it requires commitment, and it requires, whether you're an undergrad and you only do this for 2 to 4 years, there is so much value in learning to read, who came before you. And of course, to recraft it in new ways, but I guess I cannot, and I don't want to think of, making the writing more trade when I'm really trying to figure something out here, and it's going to come out in this way, and maybe in the next step, I can make sure that it's really accessible. But I do think that scholarship is intensely creative, and it's its own thing, and we need to respect it. And it's going to look different from, popular media. So I disagree with my friend Viet. I don't think it's the fault of the academic writer. We are our own thing,
And we can be attached to it effectively. Like there's an effective, anyway, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come out a certain way. I mean, like, how can I read Bowlby and Eng and all of these people and not have it come out a certain way, But as a teacher, I'm very accountable to my students, and I don't want to torture them, but I also want to say, guess what? Quiet everything in your life and see this intense, pleasurable magic, like I'm reading David Eng's book right now, and I feel lust. I feel lust for his writing, and I can't get enough of it. Like I want to lick the page, it's that good, it's that good. So, I mean, I think there's a different pleasure that comes from different kinds of languages, and I don't want academic writing to die, but I do think it's going to reflect who we are, where we are now. And it can be really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. So if you're interested in finding out more about Celine's work, CelineChamisu.com. You can follow her on Twitter. She's a prolific tweeter, Celine Chamisu. And if she was here with us in person, she would ask us to take a selfie. So if you're still around, I want you to turn your camera on. I'm going to do some screenshots, and then we'll send them to her as a thank you for spending her time with us this morning.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to engage with all of you. I mean, Chandan, I just love you so much. Connie, you're like my sister and my cousin from the beginning. And Lynn, my former student and my very, very good friend. Thank you so much for inviting me to your space. I really appreciate it.
We love you. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. I wish I was there. We can eat at Bruce Lee's restaurant in Seattle.
All right, that's all we have for today. So I'm not sure how this is going to be distributed, but I'll keep you all posted about that if you want to be able to watch the video later. Thank you so much, Celine, for you're spending time with us this morning. Maybe you can stand up and show us your outfit.
We do this earlier today already. So I have to tell you that I got this outfit, and I was saying earlier that it's not like spandex. It's more like it's like a beautiful fabric that really hugs you. It just feels amazing on. And I was wearing it for this Netflix interview that I'm doing next week. They're flying me down there. And then they nixed the outfit. They don't
we
like
decided it's going to be in Celine's contract that she's allowed to have feathers on at all times from now on.
Exactly. What's wrong with them? So I wore it for you today.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.